Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Professor Ebrahim Moosa, thank you so much for joining me on Humanity 8.0.
Thank you for inviting me.
You bet, you bet. I always ask folks, like, what do you think about the 8.0 with the humanity that I have there? Because the point, I keep repeating it, is humanity, in my opinion, right, in a way, changes radically from one iteration to the next. For example, I always like to give this example of clothes and shoes. Imagine us before that era. We lived in a very different world, right? The elements were very harsh for us, right? We were not able to walk long distances. And when we changed, the world changed in our view. What can we do in the world? The kinds of things that we can do, and it changes us as human beings, right? When the plane became a thing that of routine, sort of the world shrank. So our view of Los Angeles, or I don't know, Paris, or Algiers, or wherever, it's like I can be there tomorrow, right? As opposed to it's a foreign land, right? Or even the moon, like the fact that we were able to go to the moon has changed our perception. So anyway, I like to say 8.0 because we're continually changing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. It's one of those things. I think a lot about, as someone who also does a lot of history, how different we are today from those before us, and what along is not long in terms of the human existence, is not that long in terms of the history of the universe, but still we have come a long way.
I agree 100%. And I think what's happening now with this transhumanism movement, and also the AI that's coming into place, right? We are going to be different human beings, I think, 50 years from now than we are now. Our concept of life and death, and our concept of intelligence and identity, all those things seem to be in flux. And so what I wanted to do is, I've been talking to a lot of folks who were raised in, let's call it the Western tradition, so to speak, right? And I wanted to get somebody who is completely comfortable, like you and myself, with the Western tradition, but also have a sensitivity to our world, the Muslim world, right? And we come with I would say, different perhaps. There's a lot of intersection in terms of values, but we do bring our own perspective into the mix. And I want to make sure I don't fall into the trap of talking about Islam as if it were a category, right? Like, where is one Islam, one Judaism? But the concept of transhumanism radically changing your body, your natural body, so that you can, for example, run faster or age a lot more slowly than before. I'll start with the basic question of, for someone who is, let's say, somebody who is very imbued with the sensitivities of Islam, which has to do with humility, right? There's our Creator, and He has created us to do good on earth and to serve Him and to live to our values. And it's a basic, the basic tenets of Islam seem to be in clash with the transhumanism ethos, which is about, we are human beings, let's just do whatever we want to do, let's just live as long as we can. It's as if there's no higher power, whether it's nature or God. We are going to go and conquer. What are your initial thoughts from your perspective, first as a Muslim, to just to make sure that it's you as a Muslim, and then we can talk some more about perhaps confining it to the book and the hadiths, right? And see if there is a way to navigate a position that makes sense when we talk about the Muslim position.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to talk about this issue. It's an issue, I work on bioethics and ethics and questions of values and these issues. Most recently, I've done some work on gene therapy, and so on. So it all falls within this kind of broad framework of transhumanism, as people talk about it. Now, let me just say a few things in a preliminary sense. With all these questions of kind of far-reaching and invasive technologies, you get, technology optimists and technology pessimists, right? And oftentimes people say first, do we have open heart? Do we have, post-mortems in the Islamic history? The question of post-mortem, can we do autopsies? People said no. Then they came to yes. Organ transplantation, they first came to no. Then they came to yes, right? And I can show you a whole range of these practices. So new practices that kind of, shocks the imagination that how is this possible? People's first impulse is to say no.
Yeah.
And even learned communities, ethicists, scholars, philosophers sometimes go in that direction. And, I remember when, the first moon landing happened, my grandmother was not prepared to believe that it was even possible, right? And a couple of days later, a couple of weeks later, there was an earthquake where I grew up in South Africa, another earthquake, a number of tremors, but some parts of the country had an earthquake. And my grandmother, see, because you people interfere in God's creation, therefore this is happening on earth. So the religious kind of understanding, the religious imaginary of Muslims is always about this idea that let nature be nature, right? Let the natural world be. So many people think about Islam as a deen al-fitra. Islam is a deen of fitra. Now, what does fitra mean? So fitra, many people translate fitra as the natural way. But fitra actually means the way in which you are created. And it's your createdness that with which your rhythms and your world and your interaction with the world in that kind of rhythmic way find that rhythm. You do find in the Islamic tradition a predisposition for things natural rather than things that are, confected or things that are fabricated. So, for instance, milk and honey is better than anything that is a mixture of things, right? So there is that kind of thing. But it also comes from the prophetic medicine of the Prophet himself, who followed Arab medicine, which was basically about certain roots and certain potions that they had. It was not Galenic medicine that came later into Islam, right? I'm saying all these things by way of an understanding of there's a historical component for Muslim communities in particular who have been exposed to a religious tradition that prizes a certain kind of way, at least in some of its texts, a kind of a natural world. And then you have the development of Islamic medicine that is completely Galenic and Greek, and then it develops itself into more sophisticated forms of chemistry and understanding of the body and so on and so forth. So it moves far away from that original idea that was part of the impulse. So a question such as transhumanism, and the way you're going to find many Muslim religious leaders and others, they first, when you describe this and the way you define it as all those things that we use in order to give ourselves longevity, to give ourselves enhancements, and so on and so forth, the first impulse is to say, wow, this is like really scary. But let's just think about it. This glasses is the first very elementary form of an enhancement, right? And then we have a pacemaker that goes under the skin, and we said is okay. Oh, when it comes to cochlear implants where you could not hear, well, they, at least some people would say, well, that's a good thing that you can hear, right? But we know that in the deaf community, there's a big debate. Do you really go there? Or isn't those people who are part of the deaf community, don't they make up a certain kind of community? And why must they leave the community? Why are they forced to become hearing when there are other ways of communicating? So, people
Mm-hmm.
divide in a variety of ways on these kinds of issues.
Yep. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do you see a difference between compensating for a defect to go back on par? For example, the glasses, right?
Mhm.
God created me with an eyesight is perfect, right? Let's just say, right? For most people, right? But for whatever disease or because I didn't, observe hygiene in terms of like not reading in the dark, whatever it may be, my vision has deteriorated, and the glass is only getting me back to that state. Okay. Do you see a difference between that and someone who then creates some kind of an implant in my head or my eyes, so now I can see twice as far as before? Do you see a difference between those two?
Of course, there's a difference, but the question is that difference and that enhancement, is it acceptable or is it not acceptable?
Mm-hmm.
Which is going to give you an advantage over me, right? When you have that. Now, there is already in nature differences. There are people who can run very
Mm-hmm.
fast, others
Mm-hmm.
who can't run. We
Mm-hmm.
are we are divided into varieties of talents and abilities and so on, and that makes up our human community. The question that comes up for ethicists and for Muslim ethicists too, is this going to give some people an advantage over others, right? And is it going to result in inequality? And is that the inequality that is going to make life meaningful, or is it going to make life meaningless or create hardship? Because we already live with inequality, wealth inequality, dispositional inequality. Yes, we strive to make everyone equal, but there's only so much that you can intervene in making things equal until
Yep.
you stop the kind of creative ability. So I do understand that. The question is, will there be a harm to others if you develop much more stronger eyesight than other people? That will be the question. Will there be harm to others?
Yeah.
So there will be clearly advantages to you, but will it harm others? In other words, will you then be able to intrude other people's privacy? So
Mm.
when you have that level of sophisticated sight,
Yeah.
would there be other kinds of restrictions on you that you can just look up at the skies and the stars, or it will help you in driving, but you cannot sit and peer into your neighbor's house and invade their privacy. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's where these issues come at. Islam as a religious tradition does talk about that one must use the gifts that God has given us. And it's not always nature, but it's also we learn things, we acquire things. So we have the capacity to acquire. The question is, are there limits on that acquisition?
Yeah.
So, for instance, we learn poetry and we memorize the Quran, we memorize Arabic grammar, we do all kinds of things in using memory feed. Work very hard at becoming good at writing and become great novelists and so on and so forth. The question is, does Islam not encourage you to do that? Absolutely. The question is that it is something, um, uh, the key issue here on this score is that the Prophet has said that when you, in a famous hadith, that when you do something, do it with ihsan, do it with excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go and slaughter an animal, make sure your knife is sharp so the animal don't suffer. So the question is excellence. Would is this the product of the human imagination and human talent that we can now implant in you the ability that you can have extra, much more profound ways of sight? Is that the product of human ingenuity? And can we necessarily then, say that it is something, is that not a gift? In the same way that the aeroplane becomes a gift for travel, that
Yep.
we don't have to go for days and days on the sea and expose yourself to risk, even though we've now reduced aviation, no risk, but there's still risk, or travel with camelback or animals over large territories. So I think it falls into this domain. And I think the key question here that you are raising about implanting things into our bodies, injecting ourselves with certain things, it's a very invasive gene
Yes.
therapies and so
Yep.
on.
Yep.
Um, that question does challenge us in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
It is challenging, and but what I begin to think is that we shouldn't think of these issues in representational forms. In other words, that this is this, and so he can see further.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to see these very multiple levels of technology in compositional terms.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what we make is also becoming part of ourselves. Look at how we have adapted from, know from the days when I used to use a typewriter and your fingers get tired, to computers, to now
Mm-hmm.
you can do,
Speak. Yep.
speak and so on. But you will still tell me, but that is still all external to you,
Mm.
right? That will be your
It
argument,
would.
that is
Yes.
external to you. But we already know that by using our phones, by using our computers, there's a certain kind of interaction between us now, between
Yeah.
us and our technology,
Yep.
that we are so dependent on our technologies. And if we remove this, we are going to have a great difficulty.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
this dependency has already happened. If you are going to, some time ago, invasive surgeries to do not heart transplantation, but heart surgery,
Yep.
implant valves and so on, was seen as very risky and gave people certain kind of advantages among others who cannot afford that operation, right?
Yep. Yep.
So if you
Yep.
do a big cleanup of the heart and so on and so forth, and you get additional, arteries put in through bypass surgery, it's
Mm-hmm.
invasive. That person is now different, and if they do proper health care and so on, so they have a better longevity,
And better life quality. Yeah.
yes, and better life quality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so we do have that. We do have that already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
We do. We definitely do. I guess the question would be, um, if somebody gets the heart surgery and they take care of their diet and they exercise and so forth, they may live to be 90, 100, right? But if we're talking about gene therapy that is introduced that will double our lifespan to 200, and apparently, these folks are working on it, right?
huh?
And let's so just so that we can focus on sort of one specific concept here. Let's say some therapy has been invented and it doubles your life, and your life actually now is not only you live longer, but you live better. And let's just say that the technology has been such that everybody can afford it, right? Just an experiment, a thought experiment, right? Everybody can afford it, so the inequality issue is neutralized. Um, Assume those two things. Um, how do you feel? How do you feel that sits with the Muslim ethos? And again, I'm using it in
In a broad sense, yes.
in a broad sense. I don't like that, but I want to because I do think it exists. I can't put my finger on it. But I go back to the concept of humility, the concept of the relationship between the man and the human being and God, the concept of destiny, all of that. What happens to what in what way is it challenged? Is what I'm trying to get at. How does it get challenged? How does it get resolved for the actual faithful person, the Muslim who believes in God, right? How do they resolve this in their mind, or is it even a problem in your opinion?
Look, a very important thinker in the 11th century, a man by the name of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali.
Ghazali, yeah.
Ghazali writes in his book of love. He says the reason we love others is because we love ourselves.
True.
Right? We
Mm.
develop that capacity. Then he talks about the various gradations of love and so on. And he says that none of us want to die. None of us want to die if we can, except that at some point we reach such a condition that living becomes more burdensome than its alternative,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So it's a natural human impulse to have a good life. And a good life is always seen as a long life.
Yeah.
And in the Muslim tradition, it is seen that if you are blessed with a long life, you can do more good.
The more good. Yeah.
So that is seen as a blessed life, a long, good, healthy, fulfilling life. So if I can live until 200, I would say, why not? Okay. So the big question that we have for these questions of technology and invasive technology, the first impulse that people are going to come to you is they're going to quote you a verse of the Quran. It's the pact that the devil made with God when Satan did not want to bend and bow to Adam, and he told God, "Give me a respite. I will mislead the children of Adam. That will be the test whether they love you or they love me." And then he said, "And I will also take them on a path. لَأُغَيِّرَنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. I will exercise in the transformation of the creation of God." Now, most people, unfortunately, translate this literally, which means that he will alter the creation of God. They don't understand that the Arabic language is full of nuance. What it there means that we will alter the creation. I will alter the creation of God. I will alter their moral character, not their physical character, that they will have 3 eyes or
Yeah.
5 hands
Can
and
you
so
say
on.
it again in Arabic? I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
لَأُغَيِّرَنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ.
خلق Allah. Interesting.
خَلْقَ
Okay.
اللَّهِ.
Yeah.
So the devil says, and that's what I will do. But the khalq, that I will change the creation of God, not through giving them 3 eyes and 6 hands, that I will not. But what will the devil do? He will change their moral character, that they will become wicked people, not good
Wicked.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's so
Got it.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
the literal many Muslim reaction is this:
Yeah.
that, oh my God, you can't do this because this is exactly you doing the devil's work, right? It's so if this kind of technology has moral consequences, it's going to make you a bad person, then we have to seriously think about it. That why then we need to make a judgment call about it, an ethical or moral
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the one. That's the key thing that I think that we should deal with this. Humility and excellence don't have to be opposite things. Humility and excellence, but they can be both. So, for instance, you can be very good in what you are doing or have great talents and abilities. You can be a great basketball player. You can have extraordinary memory through a thing inserted in your brain and so on, and you can remember things and so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean that you mustn't be humble,
Yeah.
because that is a gift. That's a technological gift, an unnatural gift that you've applied. Now, the question is, would such people who have these kinds of fixes to themselves, would those kinds of technologies by themselves lead to arrogance? And will it eviscerate and will it delete
Yeah.
the idea of humility? That is a key question. In other words,
Yeah.
will the question of humility still be alive when you have these kinds of super strong human beings? But let's just do a thought experiment. Look at life expectancy. We now have really great longer life expectancy. So just ordinary nutritional kind
Yep.
of things, healthcare and so on and so forth. Are we becoming more arrogant? Are we all, or is it like it always was? Some people are arrogant and some people are humble.
I think we're becoming less arrogant, to be honest with you. To be honest with you, that's my feeling.
I think so too, because we be beginning to discover that we are all very similar,
Yes, exactly.
and therefore we have to respect the other person's right,
Yeah.
and we increasingly begin to denounce those individuals who are arrogant.
Yeah.
So even
Yep.
those who are
Interesting.
arrogant, even those who are arrogant have to hide their arrogance, and they have to
Yeah.
disguise it and put it in
Yes.
another way, right?
Yes. Yes.
But so we're becoming more
Interesting.
intolerant of arrogance,
Yeah.
and we are going towards humility. But sometimes governments and states and people very powerful can declare wars and do, unnecessary wars and so on. That's where arrogance is at the kind of a big
Yeah.
structural level.
Yeah.
But I think at the level of ordinary people, we are doing quite well.
I agree 100%. So in Islam, Islam is a religion. Again, I use it but I think in this case, I think I'm justified in saying at least Muslim civilization and tradition has always encouraged knowledge, right? Learn. And the very first thing that the Prophet heard was Iqra, right? Read or whatever the right translation is, speak or read or recite, right? But it emphasizes on knowledge and communication at the same time, right? And God said, we made you in different tribes so that you may know each other and so forth, right? So given that, I think we can say that the core to the Muslim ethos, whether it's in the Quran or the Hadiths, is acquire knowledge. God has given you the talent of acquiring knowledge. Learn and teach and spread the good word, right? If we see it in that way, in my view, tell me what you think about this perspective. The human being was endowed with such a brain, right? A miraculous brain and a mind, that it's doing what God has enabled it to do. And if it's able to prolong, life, and make people live longer and more healthy, well, that was part of God's design, right? That's one. Number two, I just wanted to make the point that, as probably you agree, is technology as such is never evil or good in itself, right? The airplane can be used to bomb, cities, or it can be used to transport me to see my mother, who's 85 years old every year. I go and sit with her, otherwise I wouldn't be able to, and that's a good thing. But bombing people is a bad thing. And this thing about technology, is obvious. Something that we have to be. I think it's up to us how to use it and so forth. So between those two, the fact that God has created us to know and discover and use our brain, and this is where we are, and therefore God must be pleased to the extent that we use this to be for the greater good. Seems to me, if I look at it that way, probably a very simplistic way, I feel okay having those two coexist. My Muslim basic, core tenets, and this transhumanism, to the extent that it's creating better human beings who are taking care of themselves and the earth and so forth, because they have a lot more to risk, right? If you just lived for 30 years, you just blow it and have a lot of fun, and who cares about? But if you're living 200 years, you want to make sure the environment is taken care of. What do you think about all this?
No, I think that I'm with you that we have been given talents and abilities and to think, and we have the commandment that you must acquire knowledge, and knowledge that is beneficial for humanity is particularly praiseworthy. And there are other forms of knowledge that are harmful and so on. So yes, indeed. And every kind of knowledge has dual use.
Yes.
We can have atomic energy that we can make electricity from it, and other kinds of things, and making MRIs and for use in healthcare, and also to help us in fighting of cancer and so on and so forth. And at the same time, it can also be used as an atomic weapon to kill people and so on. So the question here is that knowledge gives rise to technique. We learn technique and technology, and technique is part of culture. So what it is, we get a hang up that what is nature and culture, but nature and culture always goes together. The human body is natural. And when we opened up this conversation, you reminded me and your audience that how long, where we were several thousand years ago and where we've become. The natural body has adapted to certain conditions that were created by culture. Culture creates those things, and technique is part of culture. And yes, people like Heidegger and other philosophers have been a little bit scared about the power and the potential of technology, and they have issued certain kinds of warnings about that. But I think it is a warning. It is to make us alert that we shouldn't just go into these issues without pre-thought, and without some amount of consideration of the ethical, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because what it is now, these things that we're discussing about transhumanism is another dimension of being in the world.
Yep. Yep.
It's about our being in the world, and it adds to the existing talents and abilities we have, and the possibilities become more. So I think it fits in with a balanced and optimistic Islamic worldview, right?
Yep.
Now, there are going to be people who are going to tell you, but this all happens under a capitalistic mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this modality of capitalistic modality of basically uh, making and disposing,
Yeah.
and that this is part of a consumerism.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure I necessarily buy that. Yes, there are harmful aspects of capitalism. I wish we could moderate that. The capitalism that we have, because sometimes we have a runaway capitalism. Um, but I think the fact that as much as you resent capitalism, if you get sick tomorrow, you are going to take the cancer treatment.
Yeah.
You are going to take, those kinds of things that have been produced by a capitalistic culture, the goods and materials. You're not going to say, well, I'm going to go to a shaman and I'm going to do now something, that is following. There are people who follow natural remedies and so on, but we know that the chances of those being successful are much more reduced than the other ones that we are tried and tested methods. So at the end of the day, I'm aware of these various challenges to our thinking, and I'm aware of capitalism, but I also am looking for what can what can enhance us as to become better human beings. And can we do that together with being ethical and moral about it? The very fact that we are talking about it shows that we already have a concern of morality.
Yep.
But I, at least, am not one of those people who are trying to vote this kind of technology and say it is prohibited, or
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
not something that Muslims should participate in.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting Egyptian jurist by the name of Ibn Nujaym.
Mm-hmm.
Ibn Nujaym said that when you give a fatwa, which is when you give a considered legal opinion,
Mm-hmm.
that what you need to do is that you need to do more than just um, give a fatwa, but he flourished in the 16th century, Ibn Nujaym, and he said something to that. You must also have the a discernment or an insight what the consequences of your fatwa is going to be. In other words,
Mm.
ponder beyond the immediate question or the event at hand.
Yeah.
So if you are going to say no, have you pondered beyond the event at hand or the question at hand? If you say yes, have you pondered the unforeseen possibilities and consequences? You might not be able to do all of that, but I would say the moral and ethical question would
Mm-hmm.
have to follow Ibn Nujaym's advice, and that is that you must have the fiqhul futiyah, the fiqh of the fatwa. In other words, to have a greater discernment of the beyond. How is this going to play out in 100 years' time?
Mm.
You must be able to do a kind of a thought experiment,
You must try
and
at least. Yeah.
must do a thought experiment, do a game, you
Yeah.
do
Game
game
planning.
theory and so on,
Yeah.
and game planning, and plan it out and say, okay, how is this going to play out?
Yeah.
Right? In 50 to 100 years' time, with this changing or that changing. Look, already we taking, oral medicines and tablets that already in some ways tinker with our genetic composition,
Mm.
with the chemical compositions of our bodies,
Yep.
and create certain kinds of conditions within the gene and the
Mm.
body that creates certain. We're already doing that.
Mm.
We're really doing that. But because we take it through very ordinary means and
It,
tablets and so on, so we're not really thinking about that. But that is already happening.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0, with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.